How's it going, my friend? Welcome back to the God Made Man podcast, day 32 of 90 days of putting lust to bed. If you've been up to date with the podcast, you might have noticed a little bit of a gap between day 31 and day 32, but fear not, for we're back on track. Today's verse is 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11. And I like this verse because, in a way, it sums up a few of the things that we've talked about in the past, all in one verse. Let's read it. Dear friends, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against your very souls. This verse can be split up into three sections. The first part is when Peter says, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners. He addresses them in kind of this weird way. Yes, you do live in the world. You work in the world. You make money. You make physical money, and you go to places and you have people in your life and you do worldly things. You know, I don't mean worldly in a bad sense when I say that. I mean things of this world that you got to do. You got to pay the bills. You have to eat. You have to go to work. You have to take care of your family. You have to play basketball, whatever it may be. You are part of this world, but don't let that be your identity. He says you are temporary residents and foreigners. And he wasn't addressing people who were visiting from out of town either. He was saying that as Christians, we belong to another world. We belong to another kingdom. So what do we do about that? Part 2 of that verse says, keep away from worldly desires. So we're in this world, but he tells them, don't get caught up in the worldly desires. Nothing wrong with, certain things, certain worldly aspects of life, but don't get caught up in that. And then also, don't get caught up in the worldly lusts and desires that can pull us away from this bigger picture that we should be focusing on. And then the second part, or the third part, is why do we keep away from worldly desires? Because they wage war against your very souls. In this verse, we see this mindset that a Christian should have, and then how that mindset affects how they behave. That's what we've been talking about for the past 31 days. And Peter says, if you realize that we are not of this world, that we are part of another world, it changes how you behave here in this world. It changes how you see things. And especially when it comes to temptations, when it comes to sexual temptations. When we are tempted with whatever it may be, it's a very myopic view. It's a tunnel vision. And especially as we get closer and closer and more drawn into that temptation, the tunnel gets smaller and smaller, and everything on the outside kind of fades away. Your goals kind of fade away. What you want to be fades away. Like the impulse, the will to say no kind of gets weaker and weaker. And when we cave, especially when it comes to lust and sexual temptations, when that post-nut clarity hits, there's a reason it's called post-nut clarity, because everything becomes clear. You all of a sudden then see this bigger picture. And what we need to do is, before we even get to that temptation, before we even let our lusts, in this sense, I'm not even talking about sexual temptations, our lusts and desires, the things that are in our hearts that we're born with, before we even let those get a hold of us, we need to have that, I don't want to say post-nut clarity, pre-nut clarity. Yeah, let's call it that. You need to have that view of what the picture really is. That I'm not part of this world. I am part of another kingdom. I need to behave that way. I can't let these worldly desires pull me away and drag me away, because at the end, the cost, the price is my soul. The war is being waged against your very souls, is what Peter says here. In the next verse, it says, live honorably among the Gentiles, so that those who speak evil of you will see your good works and thereby glorify God in the day of visitation. So in this, in these few verses, and especially in this book, we see this message of be aware of the fact that you are a Christian, a Christ follower. You have an eternal hope. So don't lose sight of that, because when we lose sight of that we get distracted, that we get too focused in on the things that don't matter. But then when we focus really on Christ and what he has done for us, and the sovereign plan of God that's much larger than what we can understand, it helps us in the moments of temptation to realize that this temptation is trying to pull me away. It's trying to distract me, trying to get me off course. I don't want to go off course. I want to stay on the path, so I am going to say no. I'm going to Say no to this temptation. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. So going forward into the week, how do we implement this? How do we, draw close to God, spend time in the presence of God? As we do, we become more and more aware of our identity, and we become more and more aware of the Spirit working in us, and we become more and more aware of the larger picture at hand. That we are citizens of a heavenly kingdom. That we're here on this earth. We partake of the things of this world, but when it comes to worldly desires that are distracting us from the will of God, that's where we need to say no. Cut those things out, especially when it comes to lust and sexual temptations. Amen.